politics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by Ken Katkin, a professor of law at Chase Law School in Northern Kentucky. Welcome to the Wednesday show, Ken.
Thanks, Trey. It's great to be back again.
No, it's fun kind of getting to do back-to-back episodes. So we do a weekend show, we do the midweek show. And listeners, I know oftentimes the midweek show, we've done a mix of things. And so this week, Ken and I, we're actually going to break our own rules of the show. So we're kind of running away with things today. And the Politics Guys is primarily questions about American politics and policy, just like we say in the introduction. But for this Wednesday, what we want to take a look at is Brexit, because both Ken and I are deeply interested in Brexit and what's been happening this week. And we think that there are, in fact, some important areas where this is going to impact the United States. And maybe that's just me being a little bit apologetic for why we're going to take on another country's politics. But let's talk a little bit what happened last week with Brexit, because last week, Theresa May went back to the European Union and asked that they could have an extension for Brexit. And this is because May's exit proposal has been shot down now, three times?
Twice by vote, and then the third time was by parliamentary ruling, but not by vote.
Yes. So three times, but two votes. And a lot of the problem here is the question of what to do with the border. And what this means is they don't want to have a hard border with Ireland, but yet if they don't, then they'll continue to be in some kind of arrangement with the European Union. And this means that those who are a little bit more hardline have actually not preferred this particular exit package. So May, she went back and said, hey, we need an extension. And the EU leaders, they gave her a little bit of what she wanted last week. They agreed at the end of last week to delay the departure by at least 2 weeks. But there's an if. The if is members of parliament have to approve May's deal this week. And so what that means is if they get that, then they can be delayed from the 29th of March to the 22nd of May. Otherwise, the UK only has until April 12 to propose a new plan. And so May is now reaching out to her MPs and saying, look, it appears that there's not a sufficient amount of support to bring this deal back. So what do we do? How do we move forward? And if nothing can be decided, then there's going to be a hard Brexit. And things get even more complicated, Ken, because if they get the longer extension, that means they'll actually have to hold European elections because it's time for EU elections. So does the United Kingdom hold elections or not? And so all of this makes for a very confusing, a very kind of almost earth-shattering in terms of decision-making processes for the United Kingdom. So what do you think about I'm going to call it the Brexit mess?
It is a mess, and I would even add a couple layers of complexity to some of the things that you just said. It's not actually clear that May can get a third vote because the parliamentary ruling that stopped her from getting the third vote by John Bercow, the Speaker of the Parliament, he said that it violates the rules of Parliament to bring up again something that's already been voted down. And so he said she cannot bring up anything that's already been voted down, and there'd have to be significant changes to what's been voted down before anything could be brought up for a third vote. So that means that May has to do more than just try to get some of the MPs who voted against it before to change their votes. She also has to actually change the substance of the proposal or I guess the back door around that would be, I think with a majority vote in Parliament, they could end the parliamentary session. But then she'd have to get the Queen of England to come down to reopen the next parliamentary session. And that would be a way that they could possibly take what amounts to a third vote on the same proposal if it was in a different session. But then the Queen gets involved and everything, and they're very hesitant to do that, I think.
And what's going to be, I mean, again, you're adding those complications, and it's a huge complication. But the elections that are forthcoming, I mean, that, so, members of the parliament, they don't want to have these elections. But if they get the extension, they have to have the elections, because the EU has said, look, you're going to have to hold parliamentary elections for EU seats.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. I say my interpretation of that is that, but when the EU said to England, we'll give you till May 22nd if you're actually leaving, but only till April 12th, or we'll kick you out. I think what they're really doing is, if England comes back and asks for a long extension and then does hold the European parliamentary elections, I think everybody believes at that point that Brexit will never happen, right? And I think that's the pressure. So England could vote to say, well, we want to ask for a longer extension, and that we'll go ahead and hold parliamentary elections now if you give us a longer extension. And then I think the EU would say, well, okay, if you hold parliamentary elections now, we'll give you a 9-month extension. But I think that everybody's sort of assumption there is that if that happens, Brexit's all over, that nobody's going to pick it up off the table after 9 months or something. So that's why they put in the April 12th date, which is very soon, not as soon as March 29th, which was the original crash out date, but they could still be crashed out on April 12th if they don't either say, we've approved a Brexit deal. If the British Parliament doesn't either approve a Brexit deal or approve something like a second referendum, then they will crash out on April 12th.
Well, and I would normally kind of agree, but the members of parliament who are holding up the exit are not the ones who want to remain in the EU, but the ones who want out, and that right. Yeah. So the reason it's failing is because for those members of parliament, they see this as being too soft of an exit. That they want a harder cut. So I mean, could it be that they're just, all I can figure is that those MPs actually want a hard exit, and they see this as being the fix, is to hold out until there's just a hard cut.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's the thing is that it's the Parliament has no voters who are in both of those groups, right? So there are Remainers who are voting no on all the Brexit deals, and then there are people who want a harder Brexit who are also voting no on all the Brexit deals. So if they never, I mean, if the people who want the hard Brexit just keep voting no and manage to stop any majority from passing any vote until April 12th. Then that hardline group is going to win because England will crash out. But I think what could happen before then is that it's possible that the Remainers could actually get a majority, right? So it's not clear which is going to get the majority. If there's a majority vote for Remain, then there will be a much longer extension. And Remain is something that could be voted on in the current parliamentary session because that's substantively different than what was already voted on. Right. So May still has this problem that she can't even bring back the same deal that's already been voted down. And yet I don't see how she can really change the deal. And the EU isn't going to change the deal, even if Britain somehow gets it together to have a majority vote for some particular Brexit deal. So I never thought crashing out was actually going to happen, but I really am starting to think it looks as likely as any other end game here.
Do you think there's a possibility? I know that Tom Watson, the UK Labour deputy, and others have suggested that there needs to be a second public vote. In short, hey, we'll vote for your deal, but only if your deal goes for a referendum. But I mean, that has to happen quickly. I don't even know how that's pragmatically possible. I understand why rhetorically that's a good argument to have.
Well, it's pragmatically possible because the date is if they get that vote through Parliament, then that's the contingency where the crash out date gets pushed back to May 22nd, right? So if
That's
Parliament,
true. That's true.
yeah, if Parliament votes that they will authorize a second referendum, then that does that becomes a deal that's agreed by Parliament. Otherwise, it wouldn't be pragmatically possible. But yeah, I think Corbyn, Corbyn has a role to play here that he hasn't played yet. And I think you and I talked about this before. But Corbyn is basically personally a Brexiter, I think. But he's the head of the Labour Party, which is the majority of which is Remain. Yeah, and I think if he would call upon all of the Labour Party members to vote Remain, they'd be able to, with the Tories who want to remain, they'd end up having a majority for that, for at least a second referendum, or maybe just for a withdrawal of the Leave application. So if they took any of those votes and actually got a majority for it, then they'd have till May 22nd, but actually Brexit would be over, I think. But if those votes don't ever get a majority, then I think the crash out happens a lot sooner.
Now, one of the arguments that runs around that extends larger than just the United Kingdom is that what led to the positive vote to leave the European Union, in other words, to implement Article 50, the withdrawal article, was a broader phenomenon that suggests that national borders still do have deep meaning, and that nation states should be the primary international political units, and that these larger transnational organizations and others have pushed too far. And a number of people see this as being what brings Donald Trump to power, see this as part of what's happening in France, what's happening in Spain. Is there a broader argument to be made that this is one example of the pragmatic problems that occur when, as we call in the United States, it's one thing to say, hey, this is what we ought to do. It's another thing to say, well, here's the details and how we're going to get it done. So you've had this kind of big push towards nationalism, but now you got to work out the details. So what do you think about those two issues, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think just like in the United States, Russian interference had a lot to do with this. That Russia is interested in weakening alliances among the Western powers, and so they wanted to support Trump because Trump was interested in weakening our alliances with our NATO allies and other allies. They wanted to support Brexit because that weakens British alliances with Europe. And I think Russia put a lot of efforts into both of these campaigns. So I think that's a big part of it. And then I think that the political theory that the nation state is an important unit, it's a political theory, but I think to the extent that it resonates emotionally with people, I see that as an aspect of racism or ethnocentrism, and really a very unfortunate development. I think it's a real development, but a really, really unfortunate development.
Well, I mean, of course, nationalism is at heart an imagined community of individuals who imagine themselves as sovereign. They imagine themselves as having limits. So I guess I would love for you to kind of expand on that a little bit more. So do you think nationalism, therefore, is inherently racist?
Well, usually I'd say, I mean, for European nations, inherently, I'd say. For American, it could be different because we have such a diverse populace, right? But I think the idea of American citizenship isn't intrinsically linked to a race or an ethnicity or a national origin, but in Europe it is, right? So it can be,
I think, for sure.
Yeah. So and also, I mean, I think the notion of it's got some logical problems because England, it's the United Kingdom, right? But it's really only England that wanted Brexit. I guess Wales, by a very thin majority, also wanted it, but Scotland and Ireland didn't want it at all, and that's partly because they have nationalisms of their own, right? So the Irish people have national aspirations, the Scottish people have national aspirations, and if you start looking at this, well, England, why should the UK be part of the EU? We want the nation state to be our essential unit. Well, then Scotland could say, well, we want the nation to be our essential unit, so we're getting out of the UK, and maybe North Ireland could say the same, and where does it stop? I mean, in our own Civil War, when the Southern states seceded, then West Virginia had to secede from Virginia, because where does that stop? So I think the logic of it, leads to complete breakdown of democracy.
Yeah, I mean, and this is one that I struggle with because I don't actually necessarily disagree with that, but I think that the response to that is to say, well, that's all well and good, but if you take that to its logical extreme, then there's no reason to have borders anywhere. And I think most average people would find that abhorrent. And I don't mean that as a personal position, but the idea that we're going to have a singular human race that votes on things, that's all. I don't think that has much legs. And I think for many voters and for many people, they see that as that what you were proposing there is kind of being the downfall of the backbone of what's made things work. As a matter of fact, online on Facebook, we had, I thought, a really reasonable article that deeply disagreed with me about how the left is failing, and in this case, me as well, failing by not seeing how important borders are to people. So, I tend to have an agreement with you on well, where do you end? What's the smallest unit that gets to have its own national identity? But what about the other direction? What's the response then to say, well, here's where it stops. We promise we're not going to go any further. These people don't get to be included.
Well, it's a process, right? But I think it would be difficult to get rid of all borders, as you're saying. But the process that we did here in the United States and that Europe, including England, did in the EU, we had 13 colonies, and they decided to come together and form the United States, and then other states decided to join the United States. Every country in the European Union decided to join the European Union, including the UK, and they did dismantle the borders within the European Union,
right.
and they are dismantled. And so, I mean, I see that as progress, and it's not to say that that has to be done before people are ready to do it, but I think it's a good thing when people are ready to do it, and when they do it, I think it's a good thing that we have a complete borderless internal free trade zone in a very large republic, which is the United States, right? And the whole EU, including England, is maybe 30% larger than the United States, but not massively larger. We pull it off here, and I'm glad that the North won the Civil War. I don't think it would be good for states to be thinking about dismembering the United States. I didn't think it was good when Quebec was trying to secede from Canada. I think the idea of democracy depends on the idea that when people have temporary losses in their policy preferences, they don't just say, okay, I'm quitting this whole thing, I go home. You can't run a democracy on that basis. And these are all voluntary associations. The 50 states are in our union because they agreed to join it. All the nations of the European Union are in it because they agreed to join it. So it's not like anyone had these borders dismantled against their will.
No, and again, I have a personal agreement with you on that front. But I think this is where the two of us probably maybe have been a little bit. I'll at least say I think I have been a little bit blind to the position that says, yeah, you're absolutely right. They were voluntary associations. The UK comes in, and now we recognize that we can't have what we are with an open border, and this has created outcomes that we prefer not to have. And so since it is a voluntary association, we're voluntarily going to say, no, we're done with this now. And what do you say to that?
Well, I'm not saying they don't have a right to. I mean, if they go through with the Brexit, they go through with the Brexit. I'm just saying it's unfortunate. It's a big mistake, and that really the idea that the EU went too far with anything it seems to me very fanciful. I mean, I can't really understand what the actual real world practical grievances are. It just seems like people have been, worked up ideologically to think, well, it should mean something to be an Englishman. And, how can I be an Englishman if there's French restaurants and Spanish restaurants everywhere and nobody's eating kidney pie anymore? And it just seems like it's just nonsense. There's no tyranny. There's no dictatorship. England wasn't colonized by the European Union. England is a member that yields tremendous benefits from being there. The younger generation of English people, they're going to be denied tremendous opportunities by this. In terms of, they could have gone and studied and worked, anywhere in many countries where they could get the best job, just like you moved on out to Oklahoma for the job that you got. Imagine if that was in a different country and so that job was there, but you just couldn't get it. That would be a great detriment. And that's what people are sort of self-inflicting on themselves. So I'm not saying they don't have the right to do it. I'm just saying it's a really sad thing that they would want to do that.
And it's hard for me because I agree with you, Ken. As a matter of fact, on this show, I don't know if it was the two of us or if it was myself and Jay had talked about, I think that human capital should be able to move across borders as freely as money capital. Right. Yes.
And especially once, I see problems with it. I understand the concern about people from very poor countries, Mexico or Central America, coming up here and being willing to work at very low wages that would drive down American wages. I get that raises separate problems, and that's why we don't have free movement of labor across that border. But those are not seriously the kind of problems within the EU any more than those are serious kinds of problems within the USA. Right. I mean, we do have low wage states and high wage states, but not everybody leaves Mississippi and moves to California. Right. Even though they could, and they'd probably get more money if they did. It's like,
and there's policy prescriptions that you can have to kind of mitigate some of those problems as well. But I think that I think one of the things that I have been grappling with on this issue, the broader Brexit issue, is just the idea that I think I have been too quickly to dismiss the closed border people to the detriment of reading political reality well. So while I agree with you deeply, actually, Ken, I find that to be an important moral position. I think that there are many who disagree just as deeply on the moral position, and it's one that I've been grappling with that I think that comes out of Brexit. But I don't think we're going to fix that one right here and today. So what I think we might do is actually finish the show by turning to a listener question. So Ken, let me read this question. It's a little bit longer, so bear with me. Alex writes on our Facebook page, quote, "Hey guys, I had a question. I was listening to an episode of the 538 podcast on the Electoral College. As a matter of fact, they were doing this, listeners, because of Elizabeth Warren last week talking about wanting to get rid of the Electoral College." And he goes on to say, "And they brought up the idea of making it, meaning the Electoral College, proportional versus winner take all. Personally, I think it's a pretty neat idea. So my question's this. Let's assume only the two major parties could be on the ballot for the presidential election. What difference would that make on voting? For campaigning? Strategy? I get this is 100% a pipe dream, but I think it's a pretty interesting topic and would make our elections a little less static, i.e. Texas almost always being red, California being blue, etc., etc. Love the show. Keep up the good work." So a couple of things here on Alex's question is, one is what he's saying here, listeners, is proportional, meaning that electoral college votes would not be winner take all. So if a candidate in a general election won, 20% of the vote in Texas, he or she would receive 20% of the electoral college votes coming from Texas. So Ken, what do you think about the idea of getting rid of the Electoral College? What about this proportional voting? As a matter of fact, one of the things that we had mentioned we need to talk about is just the idea that in primaries, we do a little bit of this. So what do you think about this idea?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of ideas wrapped in there. I take it that his the part of the question that was, what if we just assume there's only the two major party candidates and no third party candidates? I'm not sure if that was a proposal that third party candidates not be allowed on ballots, or if that was just a simplifying assumption to make it simpler to talk about his main proposal, which is proportionate voting in the electoral college. I'll just assume it's the latter, so that he's not really advocating that we limit the ballot only to major party candidates, but he's just saying it'll be easier to talk about his proposal if we make that assumption.
And it's true, Alex, because if we were to eliminate that and talk about it, one of the immediate possibilities is that third party candidates would not always, but sometimes have to be accounted for when it came time for who's going to win, right? You might have to have it would probably go to the House more often, to be real honest. Anyway,
it could. I mean, depending how the proportion was done. So, in Maine and in Nebraska, they have a version of this, but they don't do it on straight proportional voting. They allocate the electoral college votes in those states by congressional district. So it's still winner takes all within each congressional district in those states, but the total number of electoral college votes in Maine and Nebraska don't go winner takes all, because if one candidate wins in one or two of the electoral districts, even though they lose the other electoral districts, then they're going to get one or two of the electoral votes. And by electoral districts, I mean congressional districts.
Yes, I was going to say, because in those states, it's not a pure PR, but it's more of they spread out the votes on the basis of area. Right.
Geography. Yeah.
So just a heads up, Alex, a pure proportional would mean, we're not counting the votes in any particular area inside of a state, but rather we're actually it's a pure percentage. Right. So if you get X percent of the vote, you get X percent of the seats.
Right. So like in Nebraska, typically, I think the Democrat can pick up one electoral vote in the Lincoln, Omaha area, and then the Republican gets all the other electoral votes. So that's how they do it there. So straight proportional voting, you actually do see in a lot of the party primaries. So in some big states like Texas, when I remember when Obama was running against Hillary Clinton in Texas, they ran pretty close to each other, and that meant that even though there was a huge number of delegates to be won in Texas, because it's a large state, it almost didn't matter which one of them won Texas, because
they didn't win by enough percentage.
Didn't win by enough percentage for it to matter much. One of them was maybe going to get one more delegate than the other out of Texas, and that's about what was at stake there. So very little. I do remember.
I mean, that was being a presidential guy. Many Democrats, they really hated that election. Because they saw that as being they saw that as a failure. That they were too proportional. Whereas Republicans, there are states that are proportional, but they're far more weighted towards winner take all in their primaries.
Right. Yeah, it's a real slog through those Democratic primaries, because you typically have, it's really like a game of picking up one delegate here, one delegate there, one delegate there, hoping that the margin can slowly but surely increase, and then even once there is a bit of a margin, it's really hard for the one who's lagging to catch up, because you keep. So I think those are some of the issues. I guess my thought about the whole thing would be, if you're going to go in that direction, it seems like kind of a half measure towards just going to a straight popular vote. And I see more benefit to that. And there is this thing, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, where a number of states have passed legislation saying that if enough states pass this, that they will all give their electoral votes to the national popular vote winner rather than to the winner of their own state. And if that happens, it only takes about the 16 largest states passing that to transform our system into a popular vote system. And I tend to think that would be a better, like, if you want to go towards more popular vote, I think that's really a better way to do it than trying to work with a proportional representation within the states.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, at the end of the day, the fundamental question that you have to get at here is, I think it's always fun to think about these, like you say, it's a pipe dream, to think about these ideas and where they would lead. The fundamental difference here is, ought the president to be based on total popular vote, which I know that that's a big position now, especially in the wake of Donald Trump, or ought presidents actually have to have some geographic considerations regardless of population? And I really think that that's the bigger underlying debate here that oftentimes gets under talked about and under discussed, because whether you pick this method or that method, you're always going to be picking those methods, or as you're calling it, Ken, kind of a half measure, on the basis of what you see to be the answer to that question, right? So if what we want is a majoritarian democracy, then the answer is clear. Anything that moves you closer to having a popularly elected president is going to be a good thing. And if you are in favor of a more regional distributed Republican system, I mean that in the sense of the lowercase r. I don't mean Republican the party, but Republican meaning non-democratic, where you want to respect minority rights, numeric minority rights. Then you're never going to want anything that moves you in that direction, because that's actually going to be kind of killing this anti-majoritarian system that is at the heart of a Republican system. So I really think, Alex, that in most cases, I think that's the more interesting pragmatic debate to have is, ought we to conserve our republicanism, or ought we to be, are we trying to transform ourselves to a majoritarian democracy?
Yeah, I mean, although interestingly, if you really want to conserve our the form of republicanism that the framers were thinking of, you'd want to give the Senate, and actually you'd want to have independent electors in the Electoral College too. You wouldn't want them pledged to vote for particular candidates before they went there. So I think our system has already taken
It's
lot
moved
more.
That way.
Yeah, it's moved towards trying to make it more reflective of the voters, but it was conceived as even a lot less reflective of the voters' will than the way it's run right now.
No, you're absolutely right. I don't think that you're going to be able to go back. So again, I'm not taking a side on this. I tend to think that having some geographic considerations prevent some of the issues we were talking about earlier in the show with like Brexit, where people don't feel like their area is represented, but I understand the appeal of a simpler majoritarian democracy as well. I probably tend towards the side of less or slower change, but I know that's a shock given that given my political positions.
I'll say there's a couple things about the Electoral College that I think are good. And would be lost in a move to the national popular vote, although on balance, I think the arguments for a national popular vote outweigh this. But I think the Electoral College, one thing that it does is by putting a lot of focus on a small number of swing states, that has the effect of somewhat minimizing the impact of money in politics, because the retail politicking that the candidates can do in those handful of swing states, I think it's an equalizing thing. Whereas if they had to be campaigning everywhere in all 50 states at once, that would have to be done totally by mass media. So money would play an even bigger role. And I also think, to the extent that we've had some close elections and some recount controversies and things like that, the Electoral College puts a limit on how many precincts we're really worrying about, whereas it would be every precinct in the whole United States that you'd have to do recounts and have all this and all that if you had a national popular vote. So I think those are some benefits of the current system, but ultimately I think the current system has detriments that outweigh its benefits, and I think the main problem is that there is a sort of partisan divide in the country right now, where the Electoral College is going to give a great benefit to one particular political party, for the foreseeable future. And I think that's essentially too much of a problem. You talked about people in small states maybe wanting to feel like they're represented, but I mean, I think there's a lot more people in New York and California than in those small states who very justifiably feel like they're the ones who are not represented. So
and the minute you said that, that everybody's antenna in between went up, and they said, "Yeah, and that's exactly why we don't want to be not that I'm. You're right. You have to be willing to say that, hey, yeah, the majority of people ought not to get represented, and that means you have to be able to look, New York, Los Angeles, and Texas in the eye and say, look, love you guys, but no, just because there's a bunch of you, you don't get to do this. And that's an argument you have to make. But you're right. That is effective. Either it's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the crux of it.
Yeah, that's the crux of it. We agree on that. Yep.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Alex, I hope that we have wandered around your answer a little bit, and I hope that we've gotten at you. And I'm really appreciated that you asked us a question. Please ask us again anything you'd like. We love taking on listener questions. Listeners, if you would like to reach out to us, remember that you can reach out to us at mail@politicsguys.com. You can also hit us up on facebook.com/politicsguys page, and you can get us on Twitter @politicsguys. We always take and enjoy responding to your questions. Ken, I hope you enjoyed the show today. I enjoyed talking with you on this Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks so much, Trey.
Well, listeners, I would say that if you loved the show, please rate us on iTunes, send us this episode to a friend, put us out there. It's what makes it possible. What also makes it possible is your contributions. Please send your contribution. Head to politicsguys.com/support or head to politicsguys.com and click on the support link. It is your contributions that make this show possible. And each weekend you get a bonus show when you become a supporter. As a matter of fact, last weekend, Ken and I has a bonus show. So if you support the show today, you'll have access to our bonus show on all kinds of interesting things about us reading. So I'll only leave it there. And instead, I'll finish the show by saying that the executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Bruce Johnson, Wilmer Morano, Benji Fishman. Today's show was produced by me, Trey Orndorff. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday, and I'll hope you'll join us then.